Well, friends, this last week I was in Portland for our annual conference gathering at Valley View Church in Clackamas, Oregon. You can go to the next slide, Bill. And so, as per usual, going up to Portland dredges up all kinds of memories from childhood because I grew up in the Milwaukee, Portland area. And so as part of that is also at one time in my life, I was a pizza delivery driver, and I was tasked back before smartphones. GPS still existed, but it was like a $300 attachment to your car. And I thought, I don't have time for that kind of business. So as most pizza delivery drivers do, I had to learn how to navigate the streets of Portland, which is no easy task, let me tell you. But this last week, I was struck, even just, I think it was 2 nights ago, we were going to a play in Milwaukee, and we were going from my parents' house to go pick up Angie's sister, to then go over to the high school, which sounds easy, because in Florence speak, that seems like just 3 stops in a relatively small area, but this is still a relatively small area, but there's a lot of windy, twisty roads and changes to go about. And my parents were directing me, which was fine. I didn't exactly need their help. I think they're watching, so I love you, Mom and Dad. But there came a point where I was at a stoplight. I think it was on, can't remember the name of the road, but it was over by where Bob's Red Mill is. And so I was about to keep going straight because it turns into Webster Road, and going Webster Road eventually gets you to the ballpark of where Angie's sister lives. And my dad said, turn left. And I was like, okay. Which there is a way, by, it's kind of a more main route to go that way, to turn left, and then you take another right somewhere else, and then it eventually gets you to that location. And the challenge with Portland is that I've lived there so long that there's a lot of ways to get to a certain place. There's no just one particular way. Now, some ways are faster and some ways are slower, especially during certain times of the day with all the sudden influx of people in Portland. It can be a madhouse, as you can imagine. I know we don't get that here in Florence, and that's one of the reasons Angie and I love it so much here, is not just the people, but also just how less busy it is. Now, interestingly enough, at a different time of life, Angie's mom, I was new to the family and hadn't even, taken the vows yet or anything to, be married to Angie yet, but I was going to her aunt's house out in Tigard, and I knew that there were multiple ways for me to get from Tigard to home, and so I just decided I will take the long way home. And Angie's mom lovingly asked Angie, doesn't he know the one way to get home? And which is the faster way, actually. But there's multiple ways. And I would submit to you that maybe this is how we approach faith. And maybe this is how we approach religion as humanity. Ever since at some point in years gone by, humanity broke itself. We've been trying to figure out how to fix ourselves ever since. People in describing the path of trying to get from humanity to the divine and reconnecting with the divine, we call that religion in general throughout humanity. And I would submit to you that even though there are many roads, so to speak, or many religious roads that claim to get you to a certain location that is being connected to the Lord, unlike Portland traffic and unlike, just in general with the way that the world works today, unlike in the natural, in a spiritual way, the only way in my opinion, to get to the divine is through Jesus. And you are welcome to disagree with me, and we can have a chat later about it, but the sum total of what we're about to discuss today is really how Jesus is the only way. There's not many roads that lead to heaven, there's really just one. Now, that being said, there may be many attempts that we make to get to heaven, many efforts that we ourselves put on ourselves to try to make the effort, which we'll talk about later. But ultimately, I would submit to you, even in Jesus' own words, Jesus is the only way. And so, with that in mind, the title for today's message is The Way, the Truth, and the Life. We've been going through a series by that same name. We've been at it a number of weeks now, but each of the weeks we've been highlighting a certain moment in the Gospel of John where Jesus has some words that he has to say about himself, where he has the opportunity not just to have other people give a witness or testify to who he is and what he's like, but where he explicitly says, I am this. And he uses oftentimes some kind of word picture or metaphor, or like last week we learned the word metonymy together, or a metonym, which I never knew there was an official name to that, and I'm an English major, and so there you have it. But that being said, Jesus has these different things to say about himself, and we've reached this kind of pinnacle moment in the life of Jesus where he makes this staggering claim to his disciples that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And that happens in John chapter 13, 36 through 14, verse 7. You can go to the next slide, Bill. The big idea that we're going to explore together today is that Jesus is the only way to truly know God. Now, again, you may disagree with that, and that's fine, but Jesus, I would submit to you, is the only way to truly know God. Now, what brings us to our time for today, the passage we're about to parachute drop into, so to speak, is that Jesus has now been ministering for, somewhere around the ballpark of about 3 years. And we reach this point where it's Passover time, which is one of, if not the biggest festival in the Jewish holiday calendar. Not quite think New Year's Eve, but kind of close, where it's just like, actually there's like a New Year type festival sort of thing, but just where like the sheer magnitude of this moment for Passover, it's a big deal. It is the Jews' way of remembering the time when God rescued the nation of Israel out of Egypt with a strong and mighty hand and led them into the promised land. And there was a moment where you can read about in the book of Exodus where it talks about what God did to do that. But they essentially had this really rushed meal that they rehearse and remember what God did for them. And so you can go to the next slide, Bill. So here, Jesus, he spent 3 years with his disciples. It might be a little bit hard to see on the screen. That's kind of from Jesus' perspective, looking out on his disciples there at this last meal. There's plenty of other paintings that in artistic renderings of seeing kind of the full picture of you that includes Jesus. But from Jesus' perspective, this is the last moments before he is about to be arrested and then go through a sham trial that eventually leads him to being executed on a Roman cross. But that's not this moment. This is some 12 or more hours previously. And Jesus, he's sharing a meal with his disciples, and this meal particularly is the Passover meal, where he, as a first century Jewish teacher, was leading his group of disciples, the people who had chosen to follow him, in this really momentous occasion to remember what God had done. And kind of giving some different perspective and also speaking special words of encouragement to his disciples, because things were about to go down that were going to be really difficult for the disciples to understand and walk through. And so Jesus has already said, we haven't covered it and we're not going to, but he's already said a lot of funny, strange things that sound weird. If you're just a disciple and you're hearing your teacher tell you these things, it's like, Jesus, are you okay? What's going on? What's happening here? This is not normal. This is not our usual, conversational fare, if you will. But Jesus, he's kind of getting serious. This is like the pep talk before the main event of his life when he goes to the cross. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But for the sake of time, let's go ahead and turn to John chapter 13, beginning in verse 36. You're welcome to join along on the screen, follow along on the screen, or you can turn to it in the Bible in the pew in front of you. Here we go. John 13, 36. Simon Peter asked him, meaning Jesus, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Then Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. So I'd like to make just a few brief observations about Jesus and his staggering statement to us, and then kind of relate it to our lives. So the first observation that I have is that Jesus is the only way to the Father. That's Jesus speak for, like, I'm the only way for you to get to God. You might be familiar with the phrase of, like, I'm the only way to get to heaven. And if we're all trying to get to heaven, it's not just the Led Zeppelin song, Some Stairway to Heaven. It's like actually, and the hereafter, it's like to get to that kind of a place, to paradise, to be with God forever, you have to go through Jesus. You have to have Jesus to access. And by him calling himself the way, that word in the Greek just literally means like the path or the pathway. It's a reference to both a literal road, but Jesus is using it metaphorically. And I think the great thing about him using that metaphor is that we can often talk about many roads that can take you to a certain place, like driving in Portland. And yet, for Jesus, in Jesus' day, even in like kind of the metropolitan kind of area of Jerusalem and all the different cities that were around and Rome and different things, sometimes there was one road that would lead you to a certain place, but oftentimes there are many ways for you to get to a certain spot. And so Jesus, using this image of being a path or an access point for us to the Father, that's really significant. Because we might be tempted to say, oh, I know a better way, or I know an easier way, or I know maybe a more self-fulfilling way where I might feel better about myself in getting to the destination. Kind of like when Angie's mom said, there's the one way to get home from Tigard. And I'm like, but there's a more fulfilling way for me to take the long way around. and that sort of thing. But for Jesus, he's, Thomas asked, Lord, show us the way. How do I get there? And Jesus said, I am the way. You ask me, what is the way? And I'm it. Now, if I were Thomas, I'd be scratching my head saying, okay. Are you sure about that? How does that work, Lord? Now, the second observation I'd like to make is that Jesus is the revelation of God's truth to the world. That word for truth, it's a really common word in the Greek, in the New Testament, that often stands just for truth, or the truth about a subject, or that kind of thing. And yet for Jesus saying that he is the truth, it's not just my truth, and it's not just your truth. He is like the epitome of, he is literally the revelation of God's truth to the world. So it's not even just the world's translation or interpretation of whatever truths that there might be. It's not even like the Greco-Roman philosophical school called cynicism, where you're asking, what is truth? Or, to be a cynic, you're seeking out what is truth and that kind of deal. You're not just seeking that out. Jesus is saying, not only is there a truth, but there is the truth, and I'm it. And so, if Jesus is the only way to truly know God, that means that Jesus is pointing to this dynamic about himself, that he is the revelation of God's truth, that they don't have to go looking for truth in other places to find it, to find the veracity of the subject of both the kingdom and of faith in that sort of thing. Jesus is the truth. But this also brings us to the idea that Jesus is the absolute fullness of life, which belongs to God. So Jesus not only says he's the way to the Father, he's the revelation of God's truth to the world, but Jesus says, I am the life. And in him giving sort of that absolute definitive article saying, I am the life, is fascinating to me. Because he could have just said, I am a life, which just would have pointed to the fact that, hey, I'm a living being. I have life to my being. Or he could have said something general like, I am some life, which makes it even more general. But he used the definitive article to say, I am the life. And the word for life, it is just literally the word life in Greek. But the word for life, it has the connotation here of the fullness of life which belongs to God, the life that God both has in himself as well as what he wants to develop in his world, the life that he has for us. And so if Jesus is the only way to truly know God, and Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, even that statement, as definitive as that might be, you might be like me, and maybe you might be scratching your head thinking, so what? Why should I care about that? Why does that matter? Especially in the context of if I was sharing a meal with Jesus and I didn't know any better because I'm just a naive disciple here getting to be at the meal where the rabbi is leading us through this whole Passover thing. If I were to hear Jesus say these words, I would be befuddled. I would be confused. And yet John chose to capture that moment, and however many years later that he put this gospel down, and wrote it down, He recalled that moment as somebody who was in the room where Jesus said it. And Jesus said these words, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And it was just as confusing of a moment for them in that moment. But I would submit to you that after the cross and after the resurrection, I think the disciples got it. I think they understood, oh, so I don't have to necessarily go through my religion anymore to get to the Father. I no longer have to go to some priest or some, some set of books or interpretations about the truth. I can just go to the source himself. I can go to Jesus. If I'm experiencing some kind of lack in my life, I can go straight to the one who is life, Jesus himself. I can have relationship with him. Why? Because he provided a way for it. Now, I want to share an illustration with you that it's kind of elementary, and if you've seen this type of illustration before, I'm sorry, but it just so happens to be just a really easy way of thinking through things. And so you can go to the next slide, Bill. So at one point in eons past, so to speak, there came this moment where humanity had communion with God. We were with God in the beginning in the garden that God had made for humanity. And we got to enjoy fellowship with God. We could have just gone up to God and said, hi, God, how's it going? We could have given him a high five, a fist bump. We could have we had access to God. There was no separation. We were together as it was meant to be. But then sin entered the equation. And you can go to the next slide. And now all of a sudden, because humanity chose to rebel against, at that time, God's one rule, I mean, we think there's difficult things now with laws and different ways of going about things. They just had one. It was pretty simple. Just don't eat the fruit from that tree. The consequence is you're going to end up dying. You're going to die. They're like, we'll see. and I'm, of course, making light of it, but it's a tragic moment in humanity's history, and that's what the Bible reveals to us. And I know that there are many origin stories throughout the world of humanity and what went wrong in different things. I think something that we can pull away from just the culture at large is that I think everybody recognizes, whether we admit it or not in the moment, something's wrong. Philosophy calls it the human condition. I just think it's more simple to say we're broken, and we all know it. Whether we choose to admit it or not, we are. There is brokenness in us, and there is something, now that, sin has entered the equation, God in his perfection, he can't, in the purity of like it was in the garden, he can't coexist with sin, and so now there is separation between humanity and the divine. And ever since that moment, we've been trying to bridge the gap ourselves by trying to say, I know, I'm going to try to do enough to be good enough, and then maybe then I can have that communion and that fellowship with God. If I just do enough good, that's going to outweigh the bad and the broken, and that's going to just somehow balance the scales, and I'll make it out good, at least when I pass on. And then there's even some people who say that, well, I'll just try to be good and balance the scales, but maybe there isn't really some kind of afterlife or hereafter, and we're not going to discuss that at the moment, but that just to acknowledge that is a perspective. Now, between humanity and God, there's this big chasm that's there that doesn't have any way for us to fill it. We can try in our best, but ultimately our best attempts don't make the grade. They're not enough. And so God saw our plight. He saw our condition and he decided to do something about it. That's why he sent his one and only Son, Jesus, to come and live among us, to live a perfect life, the life that we couldn't live on our own, so that he could go to the cross to pay for our sins, so that we could be with God. Now you can go to the next slide. And so Jesus is referencing, now I don't think Jesus is not thinking of this illustration in mind. This is just something to help us kind of think through sort of the realities of things. So there's humanity on one side, there's God on another. How do you bridge the gap? God decides, hey, I'm going to send my one and only Son, the only one who can really do what needs to be done to bring humanity and God back together. And so here's this illustration. It's pretty common. You might have received it in like a little gospel tract called Steps to Peace with God and different things. But essentially, if you were to think of it in this way, between like there's this chasm between us that that sin creates, and the separation between humanity and God, Jesus makes the bridge for us to be able to go and be with God. I think similarly, you could make the argument this also allows for God to come and be with us. More on that in a second. You can go to the next slide. Is there a next slide? Bill? William? All right. And so you might be thinking, I knew it. I've seen this before. And not only have I seen this before, you can go to the next slide, Bill. I see you up there. Okay, there we go. So now, with this dynamic of Jesus making a way where there had been no way for us to be with God, now we are left with a choice. We don't have to cross the bridge. The bridge is there. It's provided for us. But we don't have to acknowledge the bridge. We can keep on trying it on our own like the rest of humanity with our religion. But I would submit to you that doesn't actually solve the issue. That doesn't fix our problem. Because only Jesus' blood can cleanse us from all our unrighteousness. If you want to think about it in terms of broken, Jesus is the only one who can kind of fill the gaps. And if we were like a broken pot, if you will, or a bunch of cracked pots, but if you wanted to try to fix that cracked pot, so to speak, Jesus is the only one who can actually mend and heal the pot. And so to kind of illustrate that, that's why we go from that darkness around humanity to now we're made clean if we choose by faith to say, okay, God, I see what you did. And so I'm going to put my trust in that, not my own way to be able to try to make the difference up on my own. Now, where does this leave us, though? Because for most of you in the room, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but maybe you've seen this type of illustration before. Maybe you've been in church or some kind of Sunday school sort of thing. I'm pretty sure when we do the Child Evangelism Fellowship VBS thing, I think they even have like a moment or something each day where they kind of present this same kind of deal. If not just like once per week, we talk about it. It's a very common image, and you might have been thinking, like I was about to launch into, I knew it. That's the sales gimmick. I'm not here for it. No, thank you. I want to submit to you that maybe we should take a second look at this kind of dynamic, because oftentimes the way it's presented, and it's an accurate presentation of like us trying to get to the divine, like I've been alluding to all this time, like all the religions of the world, like we're all like trying to do the same thing, but Jesus' claim is that he's the only way to actually make that so. And yet, we are still left with a choice. Now, if we choose to accept God's gift of salvation. We choose to accept God's gift of the bridge over to Him. In our everyday lives, like, yes, this is kind of an illustration of like a how to get to heaven sort of thing. But what does that mean for our everyday lives? Because I still experience all kinds of brokenness in my life today. So do you. We live in a broken world full of broken people. And so what kind of difference does this make? Because like this is all nice in theory, but what kind of difference does Jesus make being the way, the truth, and the life for you here today? I would submit to you that it's not just us trying to get to God, but God trying to be with us. Because through faith, when we say yes to Jesus and we say, okay, Jesus, I'm having this conversation with you now. That's kind of weird. Never done that before. But Jesus, thank you. Yes, I received this gift of salvation that you have for me, and I'll take the bridge. Thank you very much. In our everyday lives, we're going to go through all kinds of trouble. Jesus even told his disciples, don't let your hearts be troubled. They were about to have very troubling times. That word for trouble is the same word that John uses to describe how Jesus felt about Lazarus, which we talked about last week, where Jesus was deeply troubled. And friends, in this life, I hate to break it to you if you don't already know, you're going to have trouble. And yes, the gift of salvation is this hope that we now have for the hereafter to be with God. But it's also hope for now. Because now, in this life, whether I have a spouse or not, whether I have family or not, whatever may come my way, if I face trouble, I don't have to face it alone, and neither do you. The bridge works both ways. And so, one of the ways that we remember this moment and what Jesus was getting at is through taking the simple elements of communion. And that's kind of a fancy way to talk about it, but really at this meal that Jesus shared with his disciples, as part of the Seder meal, they had some unleavened bread, and they also had some wine. I'm sorry, we just have juice this morning. But we take these elements to remember that what Jesus was pointing to, that he was the way, the truth, and the life. When we take these simple things and we consume them, we remember that Jesus literally gave his body for you. He literally bled out on a cross for you and for me. And by faith, we believe that that blood is the payment for our sins. So that even though in our sin we may be full of all kinds of brokenness and all kinds of darkness, yet Jesus' blood paid for it all. And so, as Jesus was sharing this meal, I can't help but wonder if he was also thinking of the cross in that moment. And that now, because of just the tradition of us taking that meal and obeying Jesus when he says, do this as often as you get together, and we take these simple elements, that we're remembering that indeed God came down to make a way for us where there was no way. And so this morning, the worship team, you can go ahead and come up, but I want to invite you to take communion with us. And like one of the songs we sang earlier described, is that there's a place for you at the table, proverbially speaking. And so Jesus has provided a seat for you at the table, for you to remember that he literally gave his life so that you could have life. That the only perfect one died for all of us non-perfect people. The only one who was whole and complete died for us who were broken. Now, the good news is we believe he raised again 3 days later, and we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks, and if you have questions, go ahead and ask me. But in this moment, I just want to invite you that if you have a faith and a trust in Jesus, or if you would like to put your faith and trust in Jesus in this moment, whether you have before or it's right now, I want to invite you to go ahead and take this cup. I know it's the sanitary version for the cold and flu season, but this is a way for us to remember Jesus. And because of that, if you'd like to, you are welcome to take this with us. If you'd rather not, that's okay too. But I'd also just invite you to think about the fact that Jesus made the claim that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And that we kind of sort of remember that by taking a simple bit of juice and a simple bit of bread, however styrofoam-like it may be. But we do that to remember what a gift it is that he's given us. That he has made that way where there was no way for us to be with God and for God to be with us. Oh, here, you can have this. Go ahead. So,
Thank you so much.
oh, you're welcome. All right, so during our time, the worship team is going to be playing some songs. And so as you feel led to do so, you can go ahead and take the bit of bread and the bit of juice and feast on them in your hearts by faith. But it's a way for us to remember Jesus. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing, and you're welcome to take those at your convenience.